Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Lit Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Fee. I've got something special for you today. I am super excited to do my reading wrap-up book battle for November 2022. I do these book battles as a way to do my reading wrap-up at the end of the month to determine my best read of the month. Ultimately, I will be determining a best read of the year in a super book battle at the end of the year. And if everything goes according to plan, a best read of the decade at the end of the decade. Can you imagine all those years on BookTube, all those videos, all those monthly wrap-ups and end of the year book battles? So exciting to think about. Let's start off with the readathons that were going on this month. Nonfiction November and New Worlds November. Nonfiction November led by a book olive. I started doing Nonfiction November back in 2020. It's also New Worlds November led by the Bookish Bryants. I also recommend their BookTube channel. They are always trying to inspire people to read more. Alright, let's look at the books that I read this month. You'll see 15 on the screen, starting down on the bottom with the nonfiction books I read. I thought it would be really fun to then read fiction books by the same authors in that same order as the nonfiction, and then I followed that up with science fiction for New Worlds November, and at the end of the month, wanting to participate in the Goodreads Good Choice Awards and be able to vote in the horror section, I realized I needed to read the Gwendy's Button Box series because the most recent one, Gwendy's Final Task, was one of the options to vote for. So you'll see all of that build up as I talk about what I read this month. Let's go ahead and get to the pairings. First up, we've got those nonfiction books I started the month out with. Grady Hendrix has become one of my favorite authors. I realized he wrote These Fists Break Bricks, How Kung Fu Movies Swept America. It was available as an audiobook, so I took that in as a quick read. It is up against Stephen King's Dance Macabre, another work that I listened to as an audiobook. Stephen King puts more of a personal spin on it, getting you to understand his perspective and his life stories more, along with him talking about horror in films, whereas the Grady Hendrix book is more of just a straight up research that basically is listing how Kung Fu movies came to the United States and all of that. So out of these two books, I did enjoy the Stephen King book more. It felt more personal. The next pairing, Quentin Tarantino released a non-fiction book called Cinema Speculation. It had a bunch of personal stories from his childhood, going to the movies, seeing films, dealing with family issues. It's not just about films, but also Quentin Tarantino's personal life experience with the films. And it is up against a non-film, non-fiction book from Dane Cobain, The Lexicographer's Handbook. It's not the kind of book that you read from cover to cover, though. It's a reference book. I previously bought and own 2,000 Most Challenging and Obscure Words. It is similar to that book, though as much as I like Dane Cobain as an author, it's not quite up to par. It's not as good as the 2,000 Most Challenging and Obscure Words book, but it's the same concept. So in this case, Quentin Tarantino is going to win this battle and move on to the next level. Then, I've got the same four authors looking at their fictional works that I read this month. It's interesting to see I put Grady Hendrix up against Stephen King again. This time it's the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. When this book came out, I remember BookTube had a lot of hype for it, and the hype is real. I am happy to confirm this fun story with a Dracula-like character that moves into suburbia, and how the women who have a book club, you could put in quotation marks book club, some of them are really just there to hang out, socialize, drink, which it turns out is what a lot of book clubs are. They're just an excuse to hang out. It was fun to see that dynamic, to see the ladies in the book club take on the vampire. It is up against Stephen King's book 11/22/63, which I put off reading until November because of the title, because of the date. This book was also super hyped on BookTube. It did let me down. I've got to be honest. It's an interesting book, but I wish I would have read it several years ago, because having recently read, somewhat recently, Billy Summers and Fairy Tale, I've noticed some patterns in Stephen King's work here, to where this book has those kind of relationship dynamic issues like in Billy Summers. It's got the portal fantasy concept with the door, like in The Dark Tower. Tower and in Fairy Tale, but here it's a time travel door, which is it's different, but it's similar to where I can't help but think I'm seeing some repeated patterns to where reading this, I was just like, yeah, these are some of Stephen King's favorite tricks that he does with his writing. I was a little let down in that sense. Out of the two of these, I'm advancing the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. It was such a fun read. Then we've got a pairing where it's Quentin Tarantino up against Dane Cobain again. Previously, in the nonfiction, Quentin Tarantino won out. This time, I'm going to give the win to Dane Cobain. It's Quentin Tarantino's novel for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I'd already seen the film, so even though it's a big deal because it's Quentin Tarantino's first novel that came out, I do really enjoy Quentin Tarantino's screenplays, though I've read a lot of those. The Dane Cobain book that is advancing from this pairing is the Leapfold Files Book 3. It is the third book in Dane Cobain's Private Eye detective series. I really enjoy the main character from that. This is a collection of short stories. You get to learn his background. You get to see him as a teenager growing up. You get to see him with his war experiences. You get to understand stories that could have taken place between books 1 and 2, stories that were possibly cut from book 2. So it is an exciting collection. It's a fun character. We then get to our second half of our prelims rounds. This is where I am very much celebrating New World's November, trying to read some science fiction. Neil Shusterman had the book Gleanings, Arc of a Scythe come out. It's a new release for this month. I'm really glad that it came out and that I was able to get it. It's a collection of short stories with characters from the Scythe trilogy, Scythe, Thunderhead, and the Toll. If you've not read that science fiction trilogy, I highly recommend it. And then you can read this book, which gives you some new point of view characters and allows you to better understand some more aspects of this setting and how it all works. That was very exciting. It is up against The Expanse Book 3, Abaddon's Gate. I've got this crazy goal to try and finish The Expanse by the end of the calendar year, a goal that I may fail at. And part of that is because The Expanse books are kind of big, the main books, though they have novellas in between a lot of them. But the main books are not having climactic moments that are really satisfying to me. I enjoy the characters, I enjoy the stories. I thought the first book was wonderful. But book 2 and 3, and for book 4 coming up, the way the climax built up just didn't seem like that big of a deal to me. But I felt like they could have done a better job, as opposed to me just feeling like, oh, the book is ending now. Oh, that was it. Out of Gleanings and Abaddon's Gate, I'm advancing Gleanings to the next level. And then that brings us to book 3.5 in The Expanse, which is a novella. It's a shorter work. It was a lot of fun to read. The Churn. I made the mistake of initially thinking that I needed to buy these individually as audiobooks, these short story novellas that go along with The Expanse, but you don't have to do that. So heads up for you, there's a collection of all of them together called Memories Legion, and you can just listen to that one chapter at a time in between reading the big books if you want to do that. The Churn was good. I liked it. It is up against the fourth book in the Expanse series, Cibola Burns. A good book, but the best part of the book was the epilogue. And it's kind of sad for me to say the best part of the book was the epilogue, but one of my favorite characters has some exciting lines there in the epilogue, so I did enjoy the epilogue. Alright, so officially between the two of them, I will advance book 4. And then we come to the last 4 books for the month. 3 of those 4 books are from the Gwendy's Button Box series. Gwendy's Button Box and the sequel, Gwendy's Magic Feather, are the next pairing. They are both novellas. They are written by Stephen King and Richard Chizmar. And Richard Chizmar didn't even include Stephen King's name on the second one, I don't think, other than there's an introduction by him. The original story concept and characters are clearly by Stephen King. And I believe that Stephen King co-wrote the first book and the third book in the series, but maybe he just kind of set out the second one. Let Richard Chizmar do his thing. I'm going to advance the first book, Gwendy's Button Box, because it has the initial concept, and I felt like it was more interesting with her as a child in the first book than with her as an adult in the second book. They're both interesting, though. It's got the moral issue of if you had the power to push a button and basically kill anybody or change up a scenario, would you do it even though there are going to be some negative consequences? And then that brings us to our last pairing for prelims, the third book in the Gwendy series, Gwendy's Final Task. So Gwendy's Final Task is up against a book I got from NetGalley by Adrian Tchaikovsky. It is epic fantasy called City of Last Chances. It comes out December 8th. And I have heard a lot of booktubers really hype up Adrian Tchaikovsky as an author, though mostly for science fiction. Apparently he writes both science fiction and fantasy. This is my first Adrian Tchaikovsky novel, and I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. For epic fantasy, it went a lot of places, has a lot of characters doing a lot of stuff. So if you like epic fantasy, it's a book that I think that you would enjoy. I'm going to give it the win over Gwendy's Final Task, and that is just a personal preference. It's possible if you're not a fan of epic fantasy, you'd pick Gwendy's Final Task instead as the intriguing kind of horror fantasy story that it is. That takes care of prelims. Let's jump back up to the top. We've got Stephen King's Dance Macabre up against Quentin Tarantino's Cinema Speculation. These books are similar in how they are put together, in the sense that they are nonfiction, they are about film, but the authors incorporate their own personality, their own life stories along with it. I enjoyed Quentin Tarantino's book a little bit more. Have to admit, I was left wanting more at the end of the book. I was thinking he may have written this purposely to where he could write a sequel as he gets older, thinking about film even more. Quentin Tarantino's book advances to semifinals. Then we've got the pairing of Grady Hendrix's book, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, up against Dane Cobain's book, The Leapfold Files, book 3 in his Private Eye detective series. They were both fun reads, but Grady Hendrix made me laugh and smile a lot more. I'm going with The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. It advances to semifinals. Then we've got the pairing of Gleanings, Arc of a Scythe by Neil Shusterman, up against The Expanse, book 4. Out of these two, it could be the nostalgia factor of revisiting the Scythe world and everything they've been through, seeing some of those characters, but I'm going to pick Neil Shusterman's book as the winner overall there. Also, it was just fun. It was just a fun read. Then we've got Gwendy's Button Box, the first novella in that series, up against Adrian Tchaikovsky's book, City of Last Chances. That is a tough one. They are both interesting. Having to pick between them, even though Gwendy's Button Box is a really interesting concept, and I like it, I'm going to say it does fall into the category of being one of those gimmick kind of stories. I think Adrian Tchaikovsky's book is better writing overall. I will advance City of Last Chances to semifinals as well. We can take a moment to appreciate the 4 books that have made it to semifinals. Quentin Tarantino's nonfiction, Cinema Speculation, Grady Hendrix's horror with some humor, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, Neil Shusterman's Gleanings, Arc of a Scythe, short story, science fiction, and then the epic fantasy by Adrian Tchaikovsky, City of Last Chances. It's so nice to have an eclectic mix of different genres, usually in my semifinals every month. So here we go. The first pairing, Quentin Tarantino's book up against Grady Hendrix's book. I have to ask, which book did I enjoy reading the most? And that is going to be The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Some people online were concerned about the level of gore, the violence, that sort of thing that's depicted in this book. It may just be that I've read a lot of horror and I'm desensitized to that. Maybe it doesn't bother me as much, but I didn't think it went over the top. I think Grady Hendrix did a great job portraying that in the book, so it's advancing to finals. In our other semifinals pairing, Neil Shusterman's book Gleanings with the short stories up against epic fantasy Adrian Tchaikovsky. Again, I'm asking, which book did I enjoy more? Which book made me smile more? Which book was a more exciting read for me? And to that, I'm going to answer Gleanings. Once again, that nostalgia factor, returning to the universe of Arc of a Scythe series, thinking about the future technology and how all of that works. I don't want to give away spoilers, but the end of book 3 in that trilogy was controversial with a lot of readers, and I like that some of these short stories continued the story out where it went. So now we've got our finals pairing, and I cannot have a tie. I have to pick one. I am out of wildcard spots. So between the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix and Gleanings The Arc of a Scythe by Neil Schusterman, I have to force myself to make a decision. It's not easy. If you enjoy these genres, then you're going to enjoy the books, I believe. Ultimately, slightly more fun to read is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. It's got really great scenes. It's got some really great strategy in there as the Dracula type of character deals with the people living in suburbia. It is exciting. I do recommend the book. It's my best read of the month. We can go ahead and slot the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires in for our end of the year book battle, where you can see there's only one spot left, and that is for December. Next month, we will need to determine my best read of December, and then we can have a super book battle at the end of the year / for New Year's, in which we determine the best read of the year. I'm looking forward to it. I have no idea what book is going to win. It'll be interesting to find out. As always, I want to encourage you to leave comments down below. I greatly appreciate you watching the videos, listening to the book battles. I hope you're enjoying it. Let me know what books you were rooting for. Let me know if you disagree with my decisions. Let me know if you have book recommendations, if you've read any of these, you have thoughts about them, or something like that. Every day is a good day for a book talk, and every month is a good month for a book battle. Peace.